Hello, my name is Stephen Hertelendy. I'm originally from New York City. I am now living in Royal Palm Beach, Florida. I am a gay man of 77 years old, and I have a story to tell. I'd like to give you some background of my history. I was born and raised in New York City. I lived in Washington Heights on 176th Street, which was the suburbs of Manhattan. I had my grandparents lived in Teaneck, New Jersey. I had two older brothers and a mother and father who were very much in love with each other. I had lots of friends in the neighborhood, and we spent most of our time outside, which lots of my generation did. But as I grew up, I started to see differences in the children around me, and it started to affect my life in ways that only have come recently to the forefront of some of my thinking. When I was very young, my brother, who was also a homosexual, but had a very different attitude because that 3 year difference made us look at the world differently. And he was born, and my father was in the war. So when my father came home, the man who walked in the door had taken his mother away from him. So my brother had not a very close relationship with my father. And him being a gay man, my father kind of didn't take to him. When I was born, my father was home. I was the last child, which meant that there wasn't the panic and anxiety of raising a baby. So I was left to my own needs, and I was taken care of wonderfully, but they didn't obsess about me. So I learned to be very independent. And because of it, my oldest brother, who was a stepbrother, he was my mother's first marriage. Her husband died in a trucking accident, and when my brother was 12. And then my father came into the picture, which, by the way, my mother and father were cousins, I believe second cousins. They grew up together. Um, they have their own story that I'll tell in a moment. But we had a very, very good childhood. Everybody was very caring and loving. The family was very loving. Everybody was around. The holidays were wonderful. And my father was a very fair man. And he had liberated some of the camps in Germany. And when he came home, he was so horrified at what had happened to the Jewish people. He would only work for Jewish people. He was an upholsterer. We would listen to Jewish radio, and I became very aware of Jewish culture, which has relevancy in the stories I will tell you about Steve and how we met and what he meant in my life. So, as a child, I was very happy and very loved and very secure and very safe. But then, when I was, I believe, 9, because that age sticks out to me, things started happening around the neighborhood sexually with the boys. And surprisingly enough, all of the boys were somehow fond of diddling with each other. And I was one of those boys. But it didn't affect me the same way, because when I was diddling or being diddled with, I would either promote it or go back for more. So I didn't understand why, but all I knew is that it made me feel part of the world. It made me feel, as wrong as I knew as it was, it made me feel somehow right inside. But it put a fear in me because I knew what that right was. Even though I couldn't acknowledge it at the time, I knew that I am one of them. And my brother was one of them. And I saw how my parents treated my brother. They loved him and cared for him, but there was a, a wall between them. And my brother kind of saw his friends as his family. Whereas my father and I would go fishing and camping and doing all the boy things together. So I was convinced that I couldn't be this because I didn't feel like a girl. I didn't want to have sex with women. Well, I didn't want to have intercourse with a woman. I didn't want to have intercourse with a man. I didn't have any interest in any of that. So I just didn't know what I was. All I know is that my father and I would fish and do all those things together. So I always felt safe and secure in society as as a man. And my generation, men were taught that we are better than women. And I know it's not true at 77, but I also know that it has affected me. So when I see the effeminacy in gay people and the fact that everybody thinks on some level a gay man has an effeminate side or is more effeminate or wants to be a woman, I find it offensive because I am better than a woman. Again, I know it's wrong, but that is my initial reaction. So I have a lot of issues with my community. And we'll get into that at some point when I tell you more about my family history. So as a child, now I am sexually active at 9, 8 or 9, very confused. And the boys, some of them, were my brother's friends who were all gay. So they were 3 and 4 years older than me. So I was being taken advantage of. I never thought of it as abuse because I liked it. But I know now that it affected me psychologically, that I was too young to have that kind of experience. So it kind of tainted my ideas about who I was later on. So now, as a young boy, because I had more freedom and they were felt more secure with me, I was able to be the big mouth of the brothers. So I was always considered the favored one. But I wasn't favored. I was just more verbal than my brothers. So I was louder and made more noise. So they always kind of resented the fact that they thought I was favored, but I never was. So as time goes on, now I'm in junior high school, and I had a teacher who was my art teacher in seventh grade. And I always loved to draw. I always would be drawing and playing with, I always loved to get sets of color pencils. I'd be so excited. And this teacher was my homeroom teacher. And there were me and 3 other people that she pulled aside and she said, I see you all have a talent. And she said, I'd like you all to attend a school called the High School of Art and Design. So she said, but you have to have a portfolio and you have to take a test for it. And she says, I want to start training you now. So we would spend many weekends at my friend Hope's house, my teacher Hope, and we would go painting and drawing. And she was very bohemian. So it gave me a very interesting outlook on life and how people could live, because her apartment was like, she painted stars and the constellations on her bedroom ceiling that would glow in the dark. She had collections of hats. It was a very bohemian house. So it felt very artsy, and I felt very artsy. So I got into it. And my father and mother were very supportive. Anything I did, they were very supportive. So I always had a really good sense that I could do anything I thought of. I was capable of anything. And I really was when I was young. So now time goes on, and we take the test, the 4 of us for the High School of Art and Design, and we all get in. And it was the kind of school where hundreds of people would apply, but only, I believe, maybe less than 100 or 100, maybe a little more than 100 would get in because the graduating classes were very small. And what this school did, it it gave you the ability to leave high school and go right into the field, almost like I forgot what they call it now, like a trade school. But at the same time, you took all of your Regents classes. So I would start my day at 8:20 in the morning and not get out of school till 4 o'clock because we had 4 periods of art every day. And I lived in Washington Heights, and as surprising to most people as it might be, to get to my school on 57th and 3rd Avenue took over an hour and 15 minutes because Manhattan isn't as small as you think it is. So I'd have to come home on the subway, do all of my Regents homework, and then start my art projects. And I would be up many nights until 2 or 3 in the morning. And my father would get up and make me a pot of coffee and make sure I was okay. And I ended up getting very, very good marks. And I ended up going out and I, after graduation, I waited 2 weeks and now I knew what I wanted to do. But just as a sidebar, I knew when I was 7 what I wanted to do. Not maybe necessarily in advertising, but I knew I wanted to do something creative. I didn't know what it was because I didn't know what creative was. All I knew is I love working with my hands. So now I'm going out to get a job, and which is good news and bad news because I never went to college. And my brother went to college, and I felt that through the years, not going to college kind of crippled me in a way because I felt college gave you a way of learning about yourself and becoming a deeper thinker. But I ended up doing that, but that's to come, that story. So you will find out how that came to be. So, um, as my first, after 2 weeks after I graduated, I went out to Madison Avenue and I went to every building that had an advertising agency. And I went up to the receptionist and I said, I'm looking for a job. You don't have to pay me. I will work here for free. I just want to get into advertising. Well, I did that many, many times. And finally, a place called Anagraphics hired me as a delivery boy because prior to computers, everything had to be done by hand. Therefore, you needed to get type proofs from one house. You had to get illustrations from another house. You had to get faxes from another house. You had to get Xeroxes from another house. So everything was being picked up and delivered. So they hired me to do that. And it became like a Hollywood movie story. I was working one day, and one of the artists on the drawing board, yes, drawing boards we had then, um, wasn't there. And they needed something done called a mechanical, which was basically an ad that you would put together in pieces before the print house could make a shot of it to make a negative before they could print it. But every piece had to be put down individually. That's called a mechanical. So they weren't there, and somebody asked me, "Don't you do mechanical, Steve? You went to art and design." I said, "Sure, I do." So they said, "Well, what are you doing delivering packages?" I said, "Well, that's what you hired me for." So they said, "Well, you have to do this." So they put me on the board, and there I was. Now I was a board man, and I can't tell you how wonderful an experience was that one. That was in the days of Mad Men in an art department with creative people all in one room talking and sharing ideas and ways to learn things. It was magnificent. At the same time, it was the days of Mad Men when there were no blacks hired, women were menial, and it was racist and bigoted and homophobic. But I loved it because I was doing something I loved. And I didn't think about all those other things. Then at work, I met a man named Joseph Lavista. Oh, no, Joe Calabrese. And he was also an artist. And we became very, very good friends. Of course, I didn't realize it, but I had a crush on him. And we would go out to his house in Brooklyn, and I'd spend the weekend. And his mother would baby him and give him anything he wanted. A quick story: he had a Jaguar XKE convertible, red, and we were driving on the East Side Highway one day, and he's speeding down the highway with the top down. And I'm feeling my oats because it's like, I'm in the car, so it's like my car. So, and everybody's looking at us because it's such a magnificent car in 1966. And all of a sudden, the car seizes up and stops. Well, Joseph calls his mother crying, Mom, my car, it's not working, it's gone. And I hear her say, Don't worry, Joey, we'll buy you a new one. Well, I had never experienced anybody being able to financially do that. So I was very impressed. So Joey and I became very good friends. So then Joey had to go to the army. And he went for, it wasn't the army necessarily, it was the National Guard. And he was away for a couple of weeks. And in that time, he met, I was going out discoing because I love to dance. My whole family were dancers. I loved it. I actually got a job at one point. That's a story to come. And I was going out to discos, and I was a regular there, and I knew all the people, and all the people knew me because this was the days of Mad Men when you did not eat lunch. You came in the morning, lunchtime came, you went to the bar. And you drank lunch. Then you went back to the office, and at 5 o'clock, you went back to the bar and you had a drink after work. And then you went home and you got dressed and showered. And you went back to the bar and you went dancing until 2 in the morning. And then you got up the next morning and got to work and started the whole thing all over again. So you were part of a very intimate group at these places. And so I loved it. And I met a woman there who was as good a dancer as I was. Not to brag, but I'm a hell of a good dancer. And we got along really well. And I liked her a lot. And I had a friend at work who was building a house up in the country. It was a 2-room hunting lodge. And he had just married and he was turning it into a 2-bedroom, 2-story house. And I was helping him do that because at the time I said I felt I could do anything. Didn't know what the hell I was doing, but we were building this house. So this woman's name was Eleanor, but everybody called her Ducky because when she was a baby, she quacked like a duck. So Ducky and I would meet there at the disco on Fridays and Saturdays and dance our heart out. So we would have a wonderful time. So now I'm getting confused because I had not ever had any sexual encounter with a woman. And the only time I did, I was 9 years old. So this was very opportune for me because at the time, you were required to marry by a certain age. If you were 25 and not married, there was something wrong with you. I was just turning 21, and people would start to question my sexuality if I did not have a girlfriend or marry. I always had girlfriends. So I thought, well, I really like this girl. We get along. I could have sex with her. And I figured we'll get married. So I asked her to marry me. We're getting married. Okay, everything's arranged. I There's a whole story about her family I might get into, but she was came from a very, very bad family. To the point, quick story, the night of our wedding, her mother hated me. And she asked me to drive her home to Washington Heights because Ducky, so just coincidentally, lived 2 blocks from me up the corner. So that made it even, it was like a sign to me, well, this is who you're supposed to marry. Didn't love her, but we had a good time. So her mother asked me to drive her home. I said, I wouldn't drive you to hell. So she ends up going home very drunk and ends up having sex with her 17-year-old son. So this was the kind of family that Ducky was trying to get out of. So she would have married anybody that asked her to. But we got along very well at that point. So now we're living together and we're traveling into New York. 2 other friends of mine that I went to high school with were living in the same community as we were, and we were all commuting back and forth to our jobs every day. So it was very hard. It was financially difficult, and we didn't very have much time to do very much together. And Ducky and I, we were married, but it wasn't like we were hot for each other, and it was more we were friends. We talked, we'd fight, but nothing really of any consequence. We weren't even really good friends. So at one point, to cut a long story short, she basically went out for a loaf of bread a year later and never came back. And what happened? I came home from work, and the closets are empty. Everything was gone, and I just kind of went, whew. No, actually, actually, I was devastated. I called my parents. I was crying. I was hysterical because as soon as I realized what this was, I realized that I had a responsibility here, that I have to take responsibility because what did I do? What about me made her leave like that? So I decided I was going to go to counseling. And now I go to counseling. It was group therapy. And there's lots of things that happen in between this that we'll get to at certain points. So I go to group therapy. This is basically how I decided where who where my sexuality lied. Although I knew, I didn't know, I didn't admit it. I knew I had crushes on men, but I didn't see them as crushes. I saw them as jealousy. Well, he's good looking. I'm attracted to him for that, but I'm not attracted to him. And the idea, this is a very interesting aspect of uh, your your self image as a gay man. The idea, imagining sex as a gay man, was revolting. So that even convinced me more that I couldn't be gay. So now I'm in therapy and I'm a storyteller and I don't lie, but I embellish to make the story a little more interesting. Well, the whole group ganged up on me one night and called me a liar and my stories are all not true. And I left the session feeling very, very separated from life and people. So I'm walking in Manhattan. This was in the Upper East Side. And I don't know how long I was walking for, but I look up and there's a bar called the Round Table. And I remember my brother, my gay brother, saying, oh, he would go to the Round Table. So now I'm looking at a gay bar and I'm thinking to myself, this is it. There it is right in front of you, Stephen. But if you walk in there, you're not walking out the same person. If you walk in those doors, that means you're admitting something that you've been afraid to admit your whole life. So I walked around the block and I stopped in front of it again. And I asked myself the same question 7 times. The seventh time I finally stood in front of there and I said, Stephen, you've got to do this. You've got to take responsibility for your life. And I walked in and it had a front room that was a bar and the back room was a disco. I walked in like with blinders on, straight to the back, turned around, and I see these apparition of men dancing together and kissing and embracing and touching each other and how could I put it? It was fascinating and frightening all at the same time. And I didn't know how to feel, and I became afraid of, is this my life? Because I didn't understand what was happening. But for some reason, I was compelled to go back every night. And I went back a couple of weeks, I was going back. And I loved to dance, so I would dance with anybody who would ask me. But I didn't understand the whole pickup scene. I didn't understand how that worked. So I was very bad at acknowledging if people were trying to pick me up. So, which was a good thing at the time because I think I was not allowing myself to acknowledge that. So now I'm sitting at the bar, and every night at the bar, who was there was this man named Philip. So Philip and I were talking, and Philip's partner, we called them lovers then, his lover was the bartender. And I would see his lover handing out his number to other people, telling Philip that he wasn't allowed to be with his friends, basically abusing Philip. And Philip was this kind, gentle, sweet, sweet man. So I asked him one night, I said, Philip, would you like to go get a cup of coffee? And he said yes. And I was like, oh my goodness. He said yes. I said, here we go, Steve. This might be it. This might be the real thing. So we go for coffee, and I don't know where I got the cojones, but I said, Philip, would you like to come over to my house for a drink? And he said yes. Now, I pooped my pants a little because I was terrified. I knew this was now going to be a turning point in my life. So Philip came over and he walked over to me and he kissed me in a romantic way. And what happened to me was I remembered being 3 years old and I remember everything was right with the world. I felt part of the world. I felt comfort. I felt right. And I realized, oh, this is what makes me happy. I'm a gay man. This is where I feel part of the world. I am I have to tell everybody this. It was like a religious experience. I was so happy to know what I was because my whole life and how heterosexual propaganda affected me my whole life was that I didn't believe two men could actually love each other. I only thought a man and woman had the capability of loving each other. And I saw it with my own parents, a loving, loving relationship. When this happened, I realized I had the capacity to love a man. It changed my life. I called my gay brother the next day. Willie, I'm gay. I'm gay. How could you be straight yesterday, gay today? I don't know, but I am. So that started my journey. And once that happened, I started going into the gay scene. And in the 70s, this was prior to AIDS, if anybody ever tells you about the 70s, New York in the 70s was debaucherous. It was the days of disco. It was the days of the Saint and all these bars and Studio 54, where people were just having sex in rooms. People were having sex in bathrooms. People, and if it breathed in the 70s, you had sex with it. I wasn't lucky enough to do that. I was still didn't understand the game. So I had very few experiences. So, but I was going out every night and I was loving my life and having a wonderful time. And I had met lots of friends and I would go out with them and spend time with them. We go to the bars but it was all stereotypical gay behavior. And I was like my brother, who was an effeminate man, becoming part of that stereotypical behavioral gay world because I'm very good at it, because I saw my whole brother do it his whole life. And I can act like a woman like anybody's business. I might give you an example sometime later. So at that point, we all went up to, I had been out now at about 3 years, going on 3 years. I had maybe 8 experiences in those years, some of them with the same people, because I am a relationship oriented person. Not that I wanted a relationship, because when you first come out, you want to taste every bit of candy there was out there. And back in the 70s, every gay man was absolutely gorgeous. Side story, when I first went into a gay bar, I was 100 pounds heavier. I walked in, took one look, everybody was stunning. I immediately lost 100 pounds. That's another story. But I did it, and I've kept it off. But part of it is I still feel like that fat man. So my self image is still not great. Nevertheless, so now a group of us go to a hotel in Pennsylvania. And it was a disco, and lots of people would go there. And oh, I should tell you some stories about the days with my friends in New Jersey when we go to the bar.